All right.
Nick Savas, welcome back to the Roadmap to Retirement podcast.
This is Roadmap to Retirement. Tune in for financial tips, investment strategies, and smart money moves to supercharge your retirement savings. Alex Neri, CFP, and guests are here to help you build your roadmap to retirement.
How excited are you to be here today?
I'm thrilled. This is my third time here, but it's been a few months, so I'm excited to be back.
It's been a little while. So a lot's changed in the world in the last few months, so that's a good segue.
Yep.
Today's episode, we're going to talk politics, but not really.
Love it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we both, as advisors, get a lot of questions from people that are on both sides of the aisle, but right now it seems to be a lot of people that maybe lean left a little bit, that are very nervous about what's going on in the country, the world, and the economy. So how are your clients handling the situations?
It's interesting because I've been doing this for 12 years, and you can go back in time and think of various events that we've been through where there's been true market volatility, which actually does happen pretty much every year, whether it makes the mainstream news or not. So I think we're going to get to this stuff and how it actually is quite normal, but there always seems to be a reason why this time could be different, right?
This time's different, Nick.
This time's different, right? That does tend to come up, and maybe it is. Usually it's not. I think the larger point of what we're going to get to is a lot of the ups and downs that tend to happen in the market, including this situation, are quite normal if you just look at historical information. The reasons why they might be happening definitely are different, whether it's stuff going on overseas, whether it's economic issues, whether it's political issues, a whole mesh of all that stuff together. So I think the reasons why this volatility are happening may be different, but that doesn't mean that it's abnormal as far as like total ups and downs in the market over time.
Sure. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I think, so I want to maybe take a step back, and I don't want to sound like I'm just picking on people from one side of the aisle. That's not my intention. I want to stay neutral. Right now, it's a lot of the people that really hate Donald Trump that are making noise. So before we get into their questions and concerns, I want to point out that 4 years ago, when Joe Biden came into office, I had people on the other side of the aisle reaching out with similar concerns. I can think of a few people offhand that called or they were in meetings with me and they said, I don't trust Joe Biden. The markets can go to shit. I want to get out of the market. I want to sit in cash. Unfortunately, we were able to talk them off that ledge and they stayed invested. And if you look back at the numbers, it worked out for them that they did stay invested. So same thing now, but we're talking to people on the other side of the aisle. So let's start with investments in general. And you've already touched on this, but I'm hearing a lot of people that say, I don't trust Donald Trump. I don't understand what he's doing with tariffs. I don't like this and this. And they have built up this person, Donald Trump, that they hate to be the reason that they need to stop investing. So how do you handle that objection? Nick, I want to stop investing. I want to pull my money, put it in cash. What do you tell that investor?
I think it's an important, there's a couple pieces I would tell them, right? The first thing I would do is whether we agree with it, not even politics aside, whether the reason that they're giving or the fear or whatever type of emotion it is, they're feeling that. There's a reason that they're feeling that. So that's legitimate. So I don't want to sit here and say downplay people's rationale and emotions.
It's okay to be scared.
Totally. So setting that aside, I think anytime there's uncertainty in the market and they see their account value potentially going in the wrong direction, people are naturally going to get nervous. So again, whether it's Donald Trump is the reason for that or whether it's something else, I think number one, that emotion is legit. And then the second piece is, okay, once we've understood that, going back to your personal situation, is there really something we need to do differently? And I can tell you in most of the conversations, there seems to be a disconnect between what people are coming in with. And I'll give you an example, right? And I'm sure you've had conversations like this too, where we have somebody who come in or we speak to somebody and the perception of, okay, the market's crashing or the economy is crashing. It's going to be another Great Depression or something extreme, right? And I think the first thing we've done is say, okay, this is what actually is happening. Let's pull up the numbers. Let's look at where the market and where it is year to date and where your portfolio is year to date, and then go from there. And I know this is something that you said the other day that you've been doing in a lot of reviews, which I love, is addressing that right off the bat, because that's like right in people's forefront of their mind, right?
Yeah, so that's something I normally wouldn't do. I'd never start a meeting with, here's your portfolio performance. I start with, here's your financial plan. This is what we're on track for.
Yep.
But lately, because of the market and people are coming in nervous about their portfolio, being able to put on the screen in our conference room and say that this is where you are year to date.
Yep.
And so far, pretty much 100% of the time, it hasn't been as bad as they thought. They're sitting there watching the S&P 500 nosedive on TV, and then they come in and they see their portfolios down 1% year to date, and it doesn't feel as bad.
Exactly. And that's where I think some of this disconnect is coming from is as of we're making this recording, the S&P is down about 3 to 4% year to date. I think it's important to remind people that, what the S&P 500 actually is, that is a piece of their overall portfolio. And there's a lot of different areas of their diversified portfolio that they're invested in. So although a lot of US type stocks, and actually if you break it down, it's really only a handful that are dragging it down. Yes, those are negative right now year to date. It is 3%, right? We saw a 20% dip in the S&P just 3 years ago, year 2022. Obviously, we went through the COVID situation where it was a major inter-year dip and actually finished the year positive and above average year. But then when we look into people's portfolios, again, the way that we set them up and through our process, bonds so far are positive year to date. Obviously, if they have cash holdings and money markets, those are pretty stable. And we've actually seen a big uptick in the international markets. A lot of the internationals and emerging markets are 8, 9, 10%, depending on the exact one year to date. If you're looking at your portfolio and you're coming in based on information that might be out there in the news or your perceived, whatever it may be, I think we have a lot of people are coming in and seeing, I don't even want to look, how bad is it? And they're thinking like my portfolio is down 30% this year, 20, whatever the number is. And then I think when we go through that and they realize that, oh no, your diversified portfolio is actually maybe down 1%, flat in some cases. We've actually see people positive. Maybe flat is just the prevailing average. When the market the S&P is actually down, I think that's where we're starting to bring the disconnect back, right? Is to say, okay, this is what's going on out there. There's a lot of information, but this is how it's actually affecting you personally. And I think it's interesting to see people's, I don't even want to say relief, but the change in demeanor and the kind of shift that we've seen in meetings. So that's why I love that you do that first, because I think if we have someone that's a little bit more on the emotional side, bringing them back, okay, now we can address those concerns, talk about what's really going on. Let's set the tone and get back to the actual financial planning here for the rest of the meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to phrase it. I also think that anytime you have a market correction like this, it's a bit of a gut check for the person that thinks they're an aggressive investor.
Sure.
Like when the market's going up, everybody's, I want stocks, I want to be aggressive, I want to buy the S&P or whatever it is. And then the second we have this correction, it's like, are you actually an aggressive investor? Because if you can't stomach a 10% loss, you should not be an aggressive investor. This is not some unprecedented thing we've never seen before. Like these 10%, 5% market corrections are incredibly common. Like this is going to happen almost every year.
Yep.
To sit here and be like, I'm nervous, I can't sleep, the market's down 10%, we might need to reevaluate how you're investing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point. And that's part of the review meeting, right? Is to say, okay, it's one thing to go through the risk tolerance questionnaire, these hypothetical questions that we talk about, usually when the market's up, to say, how would you actually react if you saw a 20%? To see those just numbers and answer those questions on a piece of paper is wildly different than actually going through it in real time. And there's a huge disconnect. Yeah, we've had to shift a couple strategies around and maybe the risk level going from a more aggressive and changing it based on, okay, we're actually seeing how you're doing this real time. That actually is probably more of a reason than anything to potentially talking about adjusting the portfolio as well.
Investments aside, the other big question I'm getting from nervous people that, are watching the news is Social Security. I've had a couple people the last few weeks come in and basically say they or he is going to take away my Social Security.
Yep.
Which, if you follow this stuff, there's some of like the Doge stuff getting into trying to figure out if there's fraud within the Social Security system and there's threats that go along with that. I guess I'm curious first how you respond, and then I'll tell you how I've been handling this objection. But if I'm a client, I say, Nick, they're going to take away my Social Security. I need that to live on it. I'm terrified. What do you say to that person?
I think, again, there's evidence and there's the fear that they have that you could say, okay, even before all this, I'll even back up. The Social Security Trust Fund, this is very public information, that is due to not be able to pay 100% of its stated obligations by 2034, something like that. I think everybody, if you were to just ask them, even last year, hey, does Social Security need to be adjusted at some point? I don't think anyone would really disagree with that. So it's one thing to say it, it's another thing for it to actually happen. Now, what they're doing with the Doge cuts and trying to make the government more efficient. They've been talking a lot about the fraud and abuse. There's really hasn't been much talk about actually changing how the payments that people are receiving.
Something has to change. And that's the thing that nobody wants to talk about is
Yeah.
nobody likes change. It's going to be uncomfortable. And the only way you change the system is like you're either paying out less money to somebody or you're having other people pay more into it. There's going to be a change. And when that change happens, it's going to be extremely uncomfortable. And to your point, this isn't like a new thing. We've been talking about this for my entire career. At some point, we got to make the change. It's going to suck.
I think and again, we won't go into a Social Security history lesson here, but basically the way the system was set up in the 30s with FDR and the demographics and how things worked and longevity and whatnot it couldn't be more different than how it is today.
Yeah.
So there is a disconnect. Now, to go back to the question, again, historically speaking, anytime the government has made changes, they've always done this, what's called grandfathering people in. This is a change that regardless of who's in office, there are reasons to say that this needs to be adjusted over time. The government, I can't think of one example or that where if someone was actually truly receiving a benefit, let's just use Social Security, that they've ripped the carpet out and said, hey, you're not getting this anymore. Typically what's happened is, again, this comes in phases over time, right? I could potentially see a situation down the road where folks who are receiving Social Security definitely continue to get it. And there's this phase out structure where a certain segment of people are grandfathered in, so their benefits would not be changed. But people who, younger generations who are farther and farther away, that in theory would have plenty of time to plan and make up for the adjustment to their Social Security checks that might be 20 or 30 years down the road. They're going to have time to adjust for that. And then this stuff tends to just work its way in that regard. So obviously we're not guaranteeing anything here, but I think it's extremely unlikely for someone who's currently getting Social Security or is really darn close to really have any of that be effective in a negative way.
Yeah, I think that's right. The biggest thing I keep going back to, and I've said this 100 times, is like just how catastrophic it would be to any political party to get rid of Social Security.
Totally.
If you went out there right now and told everyone in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and older that we're taking away your Social Security check, like you will never win another election. It's game over. And I can't say that point enough. I think maybe it sounds cynical for me to think that politicians just exist to win elections, but show me where I'm wrong. I don't know.
Even so, take that point too, and then the fact that I think the stat is 40% of retirees, like Social Security is their only source of income. That's millions and millions of people.
Millions and millions of votes.
That's a lot of people. And to do something like a Social Security overhaul, it's going to require majority, probably 60% of Congress. So there's going to have to be bipartisan support, which ultimately means compromise and whatnot. So again, this is something that's going to be debated and dealt with probably over the course of the next decade.
The longer you wait, the harder it is to deal with.
Totally.
Right? You said 2034, which is the number I've seen cited also, that we should be underfunded by that, which is only 9 years away now.
Yeah.
So there's 2 more presidential elections before that happens. So 2028, we probably won't hear about it, but 2032 election, that'll be suddenly an important conversation.
It'll definitely become more and more of a focus over time.
But that'll be too late if you're going to phase it in, you need at least a decade to do that. You can't go to 61-year-old people and tell them they can't get Social Security at 62. So like you do have to start early enough that makes a difference, I think.
You would think. Well, again, we'll end up seeing what happens.
Like, I'm going to run for president in 4 years.
All right.
I'll look for your vote.
Sounds good.
All right. So Social Security, what other objections are you getting? Not objections, that's not the right word, but what other things are you hearing from clients that are nervous about either the Trump administration or just the current world?
Yeah, I think the other thing, and that is definitely at least partly responsible for a lot of the ups and downs, is the uncertainty around the economic policy, specifically around the tariffs, right? I think that is definitely something that's caused a lot of the volatility in the markets, where we're seeing it's up a lot one day, down a lot the next day. So there's this constant up and down. And the uncertainty, I think, is the biggest point, right? And that's why there's positive news, there's negative news, there's positive news, there's negative news, that the market's reacting to that in a way that you're seeing that up and down. So I think that's also driving a lot of the questions that we're getting. And again, once we see more certainty around that, which whether that takes weeks, months, who knows, I think we might start to see some leveling out of what's actually going on. But until then, I think it's going to be this volatility that we're in the short term, we're going to keep going.
Buy the dip.
For long-term investors, that's an opportunity, yeah.
Keep buying in, buy low.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have an opinion on the JFK assassination?
I don't.
Who did it? Was it you?
I don't know. I haven't dove into them yet. There's a lot of pages.
Yeah, I've only read the 79,000 pages so far. I've got
Okay.
another 1,000 pages to go.
All
Where
right.
the secrets are.
Keep me in the loop.
Yeah.
Send me the Spark Notes. I would appreciate
We'll
that.
see.
Yeah.
Okay, so what else is new? We had that. I don't know. I think those are the main concerns I've got.
Yeah. So I think a lot of the issues we've covered, I guess we could throw another one in there. I know we've talked a lot about some of the issues we've been talking about for people in the retiree world, Social Security. I think folks who are either taking distributions from their accounts or very close tends to be where majority of the question marks have come. I think obviously there's opportunities for younger investors when anytime the market goes down to buy it at lower points. One of the other issues that I've seen that people have questions around are, and again, this probably is for younger generations, is the student loan uncertainty. So just again, to throw that in there, just because I'm fielding questions from folks in 20s and 30s on that.
Yeah, I talked to somebody who has one payment left.
Yeah.
And they're just like sitting there going, what do we do with this?
Yeah. So, anyone in the public service loan forgiveness, we're basically in a state of forbearance where we don't know what to do. And it's hard to advise people in this situation when everyone truly is in different place, whether they're having to continue to pay, they're in forbearance, their payment wouldn't count toward public service loan forgiveness. So that's also a situation that we're monitoring pretty closely here to see what actually is going to happen.
Student loans, it's always been hard to give advice around student loans. So since I graduated college, and you're about my age, like since we got out of college, it's always been all this noise around student loan forgiveness. And it's bad advice to tell you to pay off your loans, which might be the financially responsible thing to do, but I'm not going to tell you to pay off your loans and then find out 6 months later it could have gotten forgiven for nothing. So yeah, it's so hard to give advice around it with that loan forgiveness thing hanging out there. It's like, it'd be better for planning purposes if they either just killed student loan forgiveness completely and we just knew it was never coming back, or if we just had clarity on what it actually looks like. But I find it so hard to give people constructive advice when you don't know what the rules are.
Yeah, so I can give two examples in polar opposite situations. One, I had a client earlier this week she's been in the public service loan forgiveness. She works at one of the local hospitals and was making payments, has been in forbearance, and now is in a situation where, her payment has been adjusted. If she does make a payment, it's not going to count towards public service. At some point, probably next year, maybe when we have some more clarity, those payments are going to resume. So if there's an opportunity to buy it back, we're basically creating a cash flow plan and intentionally saving that amount. In this case, her payment's about $700 a month. So what we're doing is we're saving that. We're intentionally putting that into a different place, that almost like we are still continuing to make the student loan payment. We're using a high interest savings account right now. We don't really want to be investing the money. And we're just assuming that she's continuing to make that payment. So we're going to build up a little bit of a lump sum here until we get some additional clarity to say, okay, if we do have the opportunity to buy it back, we got the money, right? Let's go do it. We're not far behind. So that's one example. Another one is someone who is new to public service loan forgiveness recently. So they weren't around for the forbearance situation, and they were able to buy about 5 years back, which is great, but now they do have to start putting money towards payment, and they just went through an income adjustment. So their payment went from like $200 a month to $600 a month. And obviously it's creating a pretty tight cash flow situation. We're actually exploring the possibility of doing a married filing separate to see.
I see a lot of people doing that. And
we're going to work with their accountant to see, because they're filing jointly, which most married people do. But in this case, they're basing her student loan payment on the total household income. And we're going to explore the possibility of married filing separate, obviously look at the pros and cons associated with that. So again, two totally different situations, but issues that we're addressing here nonetheless.
Yeah, it's fun stuff.
It is.
It's, I don't envy those with student loans. It's a tough place to be in. It's hard to.
I think to your point, it's just like the economic and tariff situation. It's like, until we get some clarity and some certainty that we can,
which we'll never
plan
have,
upon. Yeah, I think there's varying degrees of that, right?
We've been talking about this for 20 years. What are the rules? If it's in my best interest to make extra payments and pay it off, I want to do that. But if it's not, because you're going to forgive it, then I just want to know that too.
Yep.
So we're seeing this point where everyone's just like paying the minimum on their student loans with saving into another account in case they need it. But every 4 years, somebody else is getting power and promise things that may or may not ever happen. And
yep.
I don't know.
Feel for a lot of folks out there right now.
Yeah, if you have student loans,
yeah.
good luck.
But yeah, that's another thing that I'm seeing out there, at least given the current environment. So
That's a good one.
yeah,
Cool. We're getting to the end of our time here. So thank you for being here. Where can the people find you?
thanks, Alex. Find me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best place. I'm
All
out
right.
there.
Nick Savas on LinkedIn.
Nicholas Savas, Savas. Find me out on LinkedIn, and happy to connect if I can help.
All right. There we go.
Content here is for illustrative purposes and general information only. It is not legal, tax, or individualized financial advice, nor is it a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any specific security or engage in any specific trading strategy. Results will vary. Past performance is no indication of future results or success. Market conditions change continuously. This commentary reflects the personal opinions, viewpoints, and analyses of Alexander Neri. It does not necessarily represent those of RFG Advisory, their clients, or their employees. This commentary should not be regarded as a description of advisory services provided by Alexander Neri or RFG Advisory, or performance returns of any client. The views reflected in the commentary are subject to change at any time without notice. Advisory services offered by investment advisory representatives of RFG Advisory, a registered investment advisor. Alexander Neri and RFG Advisory are unaffiliated entities. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where RFG Advisory and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advisory services may be rendered by RFG Advisory unless a client agreement is in place.